Two rednecks decided to travel to Canada for a hunting adventure. They chose to hire a small aircraft to transport them into the Rockies for a week to hunt moose. Successfully, they managed to hunt down 6 moose. As they were packing the plane to go back, the pilot informed them that the plane could only accommodate 4 moose due to weight restrictions. The two country folks weren't happy and protested strongly. "Last year, we managed to hunt 6 moose, and the pilot allowed us to bring them all back, and he had the same type of aircraft as yours," they argued. Reluctantly and against his better judgment, the pilot agreed, and all 6 moose were loaded onto the plane. The plane managed to take off, but while trying to cross over some mountains, the small aircraft couldn't handle the heavy load and ended up crashing. Miraculously, nestled among the moose carcasses, only the 2 rednecks survived the crash. After emerging from the wreckage, one of them, Billy Ray, asked his friend, "Billy Bob, do you know where we might be?" Billy Bob replied thoughtfully, "Yeah, I think we're pretty close to, where we crashed last year." 1. Tom always found himself oversleeping, and consequently he was continuously late for his job. This became such a problem that his boss gave him a stern warning, saying that if he didn't find a way to fix this habit, he would have no choice but to let him go. Feeling the pressure, Tom decided to seek medical advice. He made an appointment and went to see his doctor. After explaining his situation, the doctor thought for a moment and then handed him a small pill. "Take this just before you go to sleep," the doctor instructed. That night, Tom did as the doctor advised. To his surprise, he slept wonderfully, and for the first time in a long while, he actually woke up before his alarm clock even had a chance to ring. Feeling refreshed and with plenty of time on his hands, Tom enjoyed a relaxed breakfast and had a very pleasant commute to his workplace. When he arrived, he eagerly approached his boss. "That pill my doctor gave me really did the trick." "That's fantastic," his boss replied with a nod of approval. Then, with a puzzled look, his boss added, "But where were you yesterday?" 2. A man came home from an exhausting day at work, plopped down on the couch in front of the television and told his wife, "Get me a beer before it starts." The wife sighed and got him a beer. 10 minutes later, he said, "Get me another beer before it starts." She looked cross, but fetched another beer and slammed it down next to him. He finished that beer and a few minutes later said, "Quick, get me another beer. It's going to start any minute." The wife was furious. "Is that all you're going to do tonight? Drink beer and sit in front of that TV? You're nothing but a lazy, drunken, and furthermore..." The man sighed and said, "It started." 3. A 67-year-old man and his grandson were riding on a bus heading downtown to go to the movies when a young punk girl got on. She had spiked, multicolored hair that was green, purple, and orange. Her clothes were a tattered mix of leather and rags, her legs were bare, and she was wearing worn-out shoes. Her entire face and body were riddled with pierced jewelry. She sat down in the only vacant seat that was directly across from the man. The man raised an eyebrow and stared at the girl. Finally, the girl got self-conscious and barked, "What are you looking at, you old fart? Didn't you ever do anything wild when you were young?" Without missing a beat, the man replied, "Yeah. Back when I was in the Navy, I got really drunk one night in Singapore and slept with a parrot neath the... I thought maybe you were my daughter." 4. The day after his wife vanished in a kayaking accident, Long, a man from Anchorage, opened his door to find 2 serious-looking Alaska State Troopers standing before him. "Mr. Wilkins, we regret to inform you that we have news regarding your wife," one trooper began. "Tell me, did you find her?" Wilkins blurted out, anxiously. The troopers exchanged glances. One spoke. "We have some bad news, some good news, and some fantastic news. Which would you like to hear first?" Bracing himself, a pale Mr. Wilkins responded, "Give me the bad news." The trooper said, "I'm sorry, sir, but we recovered your wife's body in Kachamak Bay this morning." "Oh, no," gasped Wilkins. After a moment, he gathered himself and asked, "So what's the good news?" The trooper explained, "Well, when we brought her up, she had 12 25-pound king crabs and 6 large Dungeness crabs attached to her. We're confident you're entitled to a share of the catch." Stunned, Wilkins asked, "If that's the good news, then what's the fantastic news?" With a straight face, the trooper replied, "We're pulling her up again tomorrow." 5. This woman's husband had been slipping in and out of a coma for several months, yet she had stayed by his bedside every single day. One day when he came to, he motioned for her to come nearer. As she sat by him, he whispered, eyes full of tears, "You know what? You have been with me through all the bad times. When I got fired, you were there to support me. When my business failed, you were there. When I got shot, you were by my side. When we lost the house, you stayed right here. When my health started failing, you were still by my side. You know what?" "What, dear?" she gently asked, smiling as her heart began to fill with warmth, eyes welling with tears. "I think you're bad luck." C4-6. A blonde walks into a pharmacy and asks for bottom deodorant. The assistant, a little bemused, explains to the woman they have never sold bottom deodorant. The blonde, unfazed, assures the lady behind the counter that she has been buying the stuff from here on a regular basis and would like some more. The shop assistant thinks for a minute, knowing full well that they don't stock or sell such an item, smiles at the blonde and says, "One moment, please. I will get the pharmacist." The pharmacist looks at the blonde and says, "Can I help you, miss?" "I would like to buy some bottom deodorant, please," says the blonde. "I'm sorry," says the pharmacist. "We don't have any." "But I always get it here," says the blonde. "Do you have the container it comes in?" "Yes," said the blonde. "I will go and get it." She returns with the container and hands it to the pharmacist, who looks at it and says to the woman, "This is just a normal stick of underarm deodorant." The annoyed blonde snatches the container back and reads out loud from the container, "To apply, push up bottom." 7. Two couples were playing cards. Mark accidentally dropped some cards on the floor. When he bent down under the table to pick them up, he noticed that Dave's wife, Sandy, was not wearing any underwear. Shocked by this, Mark hit his head on the table and emerged red-faced. Later, when Mark went to the kitchen to get some refreshments, Sandy followed him and asked, "Did you see anything under the table that you liked?" Mark admitted, "Well, yes, I did." She said, "You can have it, but it will cost you $100. After a minute or two, Mark indicates that he is interested. She tells him that since Dave works Friday afternoons, and Mark doesn't, that Mark should come to their house around 2 p.m. on Friday. Friday came, and Mark went to her house at 2 p.m. After paying her the $100, they went to the bedroom, had for a few hours, and then Mark left. Dave came home about 6 p.m. and asked his wife, "Did Mark come by this afternoon?" Totally shocked, Sandy replied, "Yes, he did stop by for a few minutes." Next, Dave asked, "Did Mark give you $100? Sandy thought, "Oh, he knows." Reluctantly, she said, "Yes, he did give me $100. "Good," Dave says. "Mark came by the office this morning, borrowed the $100 from me, and said he'd stop by our house on his way home and pay me back. It's so good to have a friend you can trust." 8. An elderly couple was just settled down for bed when the old man realized he left the lights on in the greenhouse in the backyard. Then they heard voices. 3 men had broken into the greenhouse. Scared, they called the police. The dispatcher replied he would send an officer as soon as one became available, as they were all out on calls. The old man waited for a few minutes and called dispatch again. He told dispatch, "Don't worry about sending an officer. I shot the robbers, and now the dogs are eating their bodies." In no time at all, police were all over the place and captured the robbers red-handed. One of the cops asked the old man, "I thought you said you shot the robber and your dogs were eating them." The old man replied, "I thought you said there weren't any officers available." 9. A priest, an alcoholic, and an engineer are sentenced to death. They are to be killed by the guillotine. First is the priest. The executioner says, "You can go on the guillotine either face up or face down." The priest says, "I want to die face up, looking up to the heavens." So the priest lies face up. The executioner releases the blade falls rapidly, but suddenly stops just 1 inch from the priest's neck. Given the miracle, the priest is allowed to walk free. Next comes the alcoholic. The executioner offers him the same choice. "Do you want to lie facing up or facing down?" The alcoholic says, "I want to face up, to remember my glorious drinking days." So the alcoholic lies face up. The executioner releases the blade, and again, it suddenly stops just 1 inch from the man's neck. Given the miracle, the alcoholic is allowed to walk free. Finally, it's the engineer's turn. Once again, the executioner offers him the same choice, face up or face down. The engineer scratches his head and says, "Face up, I guess." So the engineer lies face up. Just as the executioner is about to release the blade, the engineer starts shouting, "Wait, wait, I found the problem." The 10. 3 guys died, and when they got to the pearly gates, St. Peter met them there. St. Peter said, "I know that you guys are forgiven because you're here. Before I let you into heaven, I have to ask you something. You have to have a car in heaven because heaven is so big. What kind of car you get will depend on your answer." The first guy walks up, and Peter asks the first guy, "How long were you married?" The first guy says, 24 years. "Did you ever cheat on your wife?" Peter asked. The guy said, "Yeah, 7 times, but you said I was forgiven." Peter said, "Yeah, but that's not too good. Here's a Pinto to drive." The second guy walks up and gets the same question from Peter. The second guy said, "I was married for 41 years and cheated on her once, but that was our first year and we really worked it out good." Peter said, "I'm pleased to hear that. Here's a Lincoln." The third guy walked up and said, "Peter, I know what you're going to ask. I was married for 63 years and didn't even look at another woman. I treated my wife like a queen." Peter said, "That's what I like to hear. Here's a Jaguar." A few days later, the 2 guys with the Lincoln and the Pinto saw the guy with the Jaguar crying on the golden sidewalk. When they asked the guy with the Jaguar what was wrong, he said, "I just saw my wife. She was on a skateboard." 11. A man waiting at the airport overhears some people mention that the Pope will be on board his flight. The Pope, he thought. Getting to see or even meet him would be amazing. He boards the airplane with everyone, and luckily enough his seat is right next to His Holiness himself. The man is nervous and doesn't know what to say to him, so he remains quiet and begins reading his book. Halfway through the flight, the Pope leans over and asks, "Pardon me, would you mind helping me with a crossword puzzle?" "Absolutely, I love crossword puzzles," the man happily obliged. "I need a 4-letter word for a woman ending in unt." "Surely the word can't be cunt," thought the man. "This is the Pope. I can't say that." So he pondered for a moment and came up with a new answer. "Aunt," he declared. Of course. Thank you, son. Do you have an eraser?" Just 12. John decided to go skiing with his buddy Keith. So they loaded up John's minivan and headed north. After driving for a few hours, they got caught in a terrible blizzard, so they pulled into a nearby farm and asked the attractive lady who answered the door if they could spend the night. "I realize it's terrible weather out there, and I have this huge house all to myself, but I'm recently widowed," she explained. "And I'm afraid the neighbors will talk if I let you stay in my house." "Don't worry," John said. "We'll be happy to sleep in the barn, and if the weather breaks, we'll be gone at first light." The lady agreed, and the two men found their way to the barn and settled in for the night. Come morning, the weather had cleared, and they got on their way and enjoyed a great weekend of skiing. But about 9 months later, John got an unexpected letter from an attorney. It took him a few minutes to figure it out, but he finally determined that it was from the attorney of that attractive widow he had met on the ski weekend. He dropped in on his friend Keith and asked, "Keith, do you remember that good-looking widow from the farm we stayed at on our ski holiday up north about 9 months ago?" "Yes, I do," said Keith. "Did you happen to get up in the middle of the night, go up to the house and pay her a visit?" "Well, yes," Keith said, a little embarrassed about being found out. "I have to admit that I did." "And did you happen to give her my name instead of telling her your name?" Keith's face turned beet red, and he said, "Yeah, look, I'm sorry, buddy. I'm afraid I did, but why do you ask?" "Well, she just died and left me everything." 13. A gorilla dies of old age at a zoo right before the zoo opens. It is the only gorilla at the zoo since they are not very profitable. However, the gorilla is their most popular attraction by far, and they can't afford to go a day without it. So the zoo owner asks one of his workers to wear a gorilla suit they have in storage for an extra $100 a day if he will go in the gorilla cage and pretend to be the gorilla until the zoo can afford a new one. Quickly, the new gorilla becomes the most popular craze at the zoo. People from all over are coming to see the human-like gorilla. About a month in, the craze has started to wear off. So, to get people's attention back, he decides to climb over his enclosure and hang from the net ceiling above the lion's den next to him. A large crowd of people gather watching the spectacle in awe and terror. Suddenly, the man loses his grip and falls to the floor of the lion's den. The man starts screaming, "Help! Help!" Suddenly, a lion pounces him from behind and whispers in his ear, "Shut the f*** up right now, or you're going to get us both fired." 14. A sailor reported for duty on a ship set to spend months at sea. On the first day, the captain takes the new recruit on a tour of the ship. He shows him the engine room, the helm, the quarters, taking him all over the ship. They end the tour in the captain's office, where the captain closes the door behind him and tells the sailor, "Oh, and one more thing. Seeing as we'll be away from land for months and there are no women on board, I know things can get lonely. So we have this arrangement with the Chinese cook. Say the word and I'll set you up." The young man is mortified. "I'm a straight man and I would never, ever think of doing something like that." The captain nods and says, "Just so you know." A few months later, the young man meets the captain out on deck one evening, and they get to talking. The captain asks about his service and how things are going, and just as they say their good nights, he adds, "Oh, and just so you know, that offer with the Chinese cook still stands." The young man refuses politely. Few more months go by, and with no sign of going to shore any time soon, the young sailor gets desperate, and on a chance encounter asks the captain for a quick word. "Excuse me, sir, I was wondering if that offer with the Chinese cook is still available?" he asks. "Well, of course, I'll set it right up." The captain answers, "Just one thing. I feel really embarrassed about the whole thing. Could we keep it between us two?" The captain thinks for a second and says, "I'm afraid not. At least 7 people would have to know about it." 7? "Why, 7 people?" he asks. "Well, there's you, me, and the cook. That's 3 already." He holds 3 fingers up. and the 4 guys that need to hold him down because he really doesn't like it. 15. A pharmaceutical salesman was staying at a bed and breakfast in a small town while on a business trip. The B&B was run by a kindly old gentleman and advertised 3 square southern meals a day and a relaxing country feel. While the salesman was eating his breakfast, he noticed what appeared to be breadcrumbs next to his grits. He put it out of mind, though, as he was reading the local paper. After visiting the local dentist, the salesman came back to the lodge for lunch. He couldn't help but notice some grits and breadcrumbs on his plate next to his pulled pork and collard greens. Somewhat disturbed, the salesman inquired about the cleanliness of his plate. "That's as clean as cold water will get 'em," the gentleman drawled. While still confused but oddly comforted, the salesman left to call on the local doctor. Feeling good after his successful sales, the salesman decided to go out to a local bar for drinks after stopping by the B&B to change clothes. As he was leaving, he noticed the gentleman's fat old dog laying about the parlor. As he stooped down to pet the pathetic creature, he inquired its name from the gentleman. "Cold water," came the response. 16. A big game hunter walked into a club and was bragging to everyone about his hunting skills. He claimed that they could blindfold him and he would recognize any animal's skin from its feel. And if he could locate the bullet hole, he would even tell them the caliber. The other patrons thought he was blowing smoke and decided to make a bet. If he won, they would buy him a drink. If he lost, he owed the whole bar a round. They blindfolded him and took him to his first animal skin. After feeling it for a few moments, he announced, "Bear!" Then he felt the bullet hole and declared, "Shot with a .308 rifle." He was right. They brought him another skin, one that someone had in their car trunk. He took a bit longer this time and then said, "Elk, shot with a 7mm mag rifle." He was right again. Through the night, he proved his skills again and again, every time against a round of drinks. Finally, he staggered home, drunk out of his mind, and went to sleep. The next morning, he woke up with a headache and a black eye. He said to his wife, "I know I was drunk last night, but not drunk enough to get in a fight. Where did I get this black eye?" His wife angrily replied, "I gave it to you. You got into bed and put your hand down my pant. Then you fiddled around a bit and loudly announced, 'Skunk killed with an axe.'"